The glass was already in his hand when the girl said it. "Don't drink that, Mr. Ashworth." Her voice was small, barely above the noise of the room, but something in it cut straight through. Not the words, the way she said them. Flat. Certain. Like she wasn't asking him to stop. Like she already knew what would happen if he didn't. Garrison Ashworth set the glass down. He didn't know why. He would think about that later. Why, a 63-year-old man, a senior partner at one of the most respected law firms on the Eastern Seaboard, had listened to a 9-year-old girl he barely knew over the pull of a perfectly poured scotch at his own retirement celebration. But he did. He set it down on the edge of the mahogany side table, and he turned to look at her. She was standing near the hallway that led to the kitchen, half behind the curtain, watching him with eyes that were too steady for her age. Her name was Brinley Cole. She was the daughter of Audra Cole, who had been Garrison's office manager for 11 years. Audra had brought Brinley tonight because the school let out early, and the babysitter had canceled, and Garrison had told her, as he always did, "Don't worry about it, just bring her." Brinley had been quiet all evening, sitting in the corner of the Ashworth home's great room, with a glass of ginger ale and a plate of crackers, watching the adults the way children do when they've learned that watching is safer than speaking. She was still watching now. "What did you say?" Garrison asked. Brinley stepped out from behind the curtain. "Don't drink that one, the one they gave you." He looked at the glass, dark amber, a single large cube of ice, his initials etched into the crystal. It looked exactly like every other scotch he'd been handed tonight. "Why not?" he said. She glanced toward the kitchen door and then back at him. "Because I saw." The party had been going for 2 hours by then. 47 people filled the great room and spilled out onto the back terrace of Garrison's home in Whitmore Hill, Virginia, partners and his associates from the firm. A few old clients, neighbors he'd known for 30 years. His younger brother Neil and his wife from Richmond, catered food, a jazz trio in the corner, the kind of event his personal assistant Marjolaine had been planning for 3 months without him knowing. It was supposed to be a surprise, and it had been genuinely when he'd walked through the front door at 7 o'clock expecting a quiet dinner with Neil and instead found 47 people yelling the word at him. He'd laughed. He'd hugged people. He'd accepted a glass of champagne and made a toast he hadn't prepared. He was retiring. After 38 years, he was done. The firm would pass to the next generation of partners, a transition he'd been carefully arranging for the past 2 years. He had a lake house in North Carolina, a woodworking shop he'd barely touched, a stack of books on the nightstand that had been growing since 2019. He was supposed to feel relief, and mostly he did. The scotch had appeared around 9 o'clock. One of the catering staff had brought it to him on a silver tray, a single glass, said it was from Mr. Dean with his congratulations. Garrison had taken it without looking up from his conversation. Fenwick Dean was a colleague. Not a close friend, but a decent man, someone he'd tried cases against twice over the years and respected. A bottle of good scotch was exactly the kind of gesture Fenwick would make. He'd carried the glass around for 20 minutes without drinking it, caught up in conversation after conversation, the way you are at a party when you're the reason for it. He'd been about to finally take a sip when Brinley spoke. "What did you see?" Garrison asked. He kept his voice quiet, steady. Brinley looked at the kitchen door again. The man in the gray vest. He came out of the kitchen with that glass. But before he came out, I was near the door. I wasn't trying to be. I just wanted to get away from the loud part, and the other man was in there with him. "What other man?" "The one with the dark jacket. The one who was standing near the bar when you walked in. He gave the man in the vest something, a little bottle, from his inside pocket." She touched her own chest to show him, "And then the man in the vest put it in the glass, your glass, and then he brought it out to you." Garrison was very still. "Are you sure it was this glass?" "It had your initials on it," she said. "I can see them from here." He looked down, GRA etched into the crystal in a clean serif font. He'd owned these glasses for 15 years. "Did you tell your mother? She's talking to the partners. I didn't want to interrupt." "And I didn't know if—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I didn't know if you'd believe me." "I believe you," Garrison said. He watched her shoulders drop half an inch with relief, and something tightened in his chest. He didn't make a scene. That was the first decision. Garrison Ashworth had spent 38 years in a courtroom, which meant he had spent 38 years learning when to move and when to wait. Every instinct he had right now was pulling him toward the kitchen door, toward confrontation, toward demanding an explanation in front of 47 witnesses. He let those instincts run until they tired themselves out, and then he thought clearly. He needed the glass, he needed the man in the gray vest, he needed the man with the dark jacket, and he needed all of it before anyone realized anything was wrong. "Brinley," he said quietly, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to go find Raymond. He's the man at the front door, tall, blue tie. Tell him I need him in the study. Tell him only. Don't tell anyone else. Raymond Stokes had worked private security for Garrison for 6 years. He'd driven him to court dates, sat outside deposition rooms, managed building access during 3 very unpleasant trials involving people who did not like losing. He was discreet in the way that only people who have seen a great deal of undiscreet behavior can be. "Okay," Brinley said. "Go slow," Garrison said. "Don't look like you're hurrying." She walked away at the measured pace of a child trying very hard not to run. Garrison picked up the glass, carefully, by the base, and walked to his study. Raymond was there in 4 minutes. He listened without interrupting while Garrison described what Brinley had told him. When Garrison finished, Raymond looked at the glass sitting on the corner of the desk and said, "You didn't touch the rim? Base? Only. Good." Raymond pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call a contact at the county lab. We can have someone here in 20 minutes. He looked up. "You want to keep the party going?" "For now. I need to know who the man in the dark jacket is. I can pull the door footage. I've got a camera on the front entry and one on the driveway. Give me 10 minutes. Do it quietly." Raymond nodded and stepped out. Garrison sat in the leather chair behind his desk and looked at the glass. The ice had half melted by now. The amber color was slightly diluted at the top. He thought about the moment he'd been about to drink it. The glass halfway to his lips, the sound of the jazz trio in the background, the low buzz of conversation filling his house. He thought about how natural it had felt, how unremarkable. A man at his own party, accepting a drink, not thinking twice about it. He thought about Brinley Cole standing behind a curtain, watching. Children, he thought, notice things. Because they haven't learned yet to stop looking. Raymond came back in 12 minutes with his laptop and a photograph pulled from the driveway footage. The man in the dark jacket had arrived at 7:42, 40 minutes into the party. He'd come in behind a group of 4 other guests, close enough to look like he was with them, far enough that he wasn't. He was in his mid-40s, dark-haired, a jaw like a bracket. Garrison didn't recognize him. "He's not on the guest list," Raymond said. "I cross-referenced. He doesn't appear in any of the photos from the front entry check-in either." He walked around the side. "He wasn't invited." "No," Garrison leaned in over the laptop. "What about the gray vest?" Raymond pulled up a second image. The catering staff. 6 people in matching gray vests, hired through an event company out of Arlington. "I'm running their info now, but it'll take time I don't have tonight. The better play." He paused. "The better play is we locate the man in the dark jacket before he leaves. Is he still here? Last visual I have on him is 9:17, near the terrace door." It was 9:41 now. "Find him," Garrison said. He went back to the party. That was the hardest part, walking back into the bright noise of his own celebration. Accepting hugs, laughing at jokes, refilling the decoy glass with plain soda water and carrying it around so that anyone watching would think he was still holding the scotch. His brother Neil caught him by the elbow near the fireplace and said, "You okay? You look a little distracted." "Long day," Garrison said. "Good distracted." Neil squeezed his arm and moved off. Garrison scanned the room while he talked. He was looking for the dark jacket, the brackets of that jaw, the particular stillness of a man waiting for something. He talked to Marjolaine about the jazz trio. He talked to his longtime colleague Frank about a case they'd worked in 2009. He talked to Audra Cole for 3 minutes and watched her eyes, warm, tired, relieved that the evening was going well, and thought, she doesn't know her daughter just changed the course of tonight. At 10:04, Raymond sent a text, "Side garden, South Path, don't come yet." At 10:11, a second text, "Got him. Call police now." The man's name was Derek Solano. That came out later, much later, over the following weeks, in a sequence of conversations and documents that Garrison would come to know better than he knew almost anything else in his life. Derek Solano was a private investigator, mid-level, with an address in Fairfax County and a history of work that occupied a gray space between legal and not. He had been hired, and this was the part that took Garrison 3 days to fully absorb, by a man named Clifton Prace. Clifton Prace was a name Garrison knew. He'd represented Clifton's wife, Nadine, in a divorce proceeding 14 months ago. It had not gone well for Clifton. The settlement had stripped him of a significant portion of a business he'd spent 20 years building, the result of financial disclosures that Garrison's team had been very thorough in uncovering. Clifton had sat in the opposing chairs during mediation with the flat, controlled expression of a man storing something. Garrison had seen that expression before. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. He thought about it now. The police arrived at 10:23. Raymond had Solano in the side garden, not physically restrained, just present, positioned, so that the garden gate was the only exit and Raymond was between Solano and the gate. Solano had been calm until the moment he wasn't, and then Raymond had been calmer, which had settled things again. 2 officers came in through the side entrance. Garrison met them at the garden door and gave them the condensed version in under 2 minutes. Uninvited guest, credible witness, reported observed tampering, glass in study available for testing. The officers looked at him in the way that people sometimes look at Garrison Ashworth when they realize they are talking to a man who has spent 4 decades making exactly this kind of statement in exactly this kind of environment. "You didn't drink any of it?" the first officer asked. "I did not. And the witness is 9 years old," Garrison said, and saw it clearly. The second officer wrote something down. Solano was taken in for questioning. The glass was bagged and transported. The man in the gray vest, whose name turned out to be Callow Rent, a contracted server who had been approached by Solano 3 weeks earlier with a cash offer and a very simple job, was as identified through the catering company's records by mid-morning the following day. The lab results came back in 72 hours. The scotch had contained a compound, not immediately lethal in a single dose, the toxicologist explained, but consistent with causing acute cardiac stress in a man of Garrison's age and existing blood pressure history. Something that might have looked in the ambulance like a heart attack. Garrison read the report twice. Then he set it down on his desk and sat quietly for a while. He had not called Brinley that night. There had been too much. The police, the statements, the careful work of getting 47 guests out of his house without turning it into a scene he'd have to explain publicly before he was ready. But 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, he called Audra. "I need to speak to Brinley," he said. "If she's willing, and if you're there with her." Audra was quiet for a moment. "She's been asking about you," she said. "She wanted to know if you were okay. Tell her I'm okay. Tell her I want to talk to her. Tell her she did something extraordinary." They came on Thursday afternoon. Garrison made hot chocolate for Brinley because he didn't know if she drank coffee. She did not, and for Audra, and sat across from them at the kitchen table, which felt more appropriate than the formal dining room, and told them both as much as he could about what had been discovered. Brinley listened with the same focused stillness she'd had at the party. When he finished, she looked at the table for a moment and then said, "I wasn't sure you'd believe me." "You said that before, because it was true before." Garrison nodded. "You were right to be uncertain. A lot of adults wouldn't have stopped. I almost didn't, but you did." "I did." She looked up at him. "Why?" He thought about it. It was a fair question and it deserved a fair answer. "Because of the way you said it," he finally said. "You weren't trying to get attention. You weren't performing. You just said it like it was a fact. Like you were telling me the stove was on." He paused. Children don't usually have a reason to lie about something like that. Adults have learned to lie strategically. Children haven't yet. When a child says something with that kind of certainty, it means they actually saw it. Brinley considered this. "My teacher says children's testimony isn't reliable." "Your teacher is partly right," Garrison said. "About some things, memory is suggestible. Context matters. Leading questions matter. But what you gave me wasn't testimony. It was a warning in real time. That's different. That's just observation." She nodded slowly, as though filing this away. Audra had been quiet through most of this, her hands wrapped around her mug, watching her daughter with the particular expression of a parent who is seeing their child clearly for the first time in a new light. Not differently, just newly, like a familiar view from an angle she hadn't taken before. The legal proceedings involving Derek Solano and Clifton Prace took 11 months. Garrison didn't handle them. That would have been a conflict. And besides, he was retired now, or trying to be. He handed everything to a former colleague who was both excellent and discreet. And he checked in monthly, and he let the process work the way the process was supposed to work. Prace's attorneys attempted 2 different arguments that didn't hold. Solano cooperated early in exchange for consideration on his sentence. Rent, the server, had documented evidence of the cash transaction and cooperated fully. Clifton Prace was convicted on charges of solicitation to commit aggravated assault. He received a sentence that would occupy the next several years of his life in a way he had not planned for. Garrison attended the sentencing. He sat in the gallery and watched Clifton Prace stand at the defense table and heard the judge read the outcome and watched Clifton's attorneys take notes on yellow legal pads. Clifton glanced at the gallery once, and his eyes found Garrison's for a moment, and then looked away. Garrison thought about Nadine Prace, who had rebuilt her life in the past 14 months with the settlement she'd been fairly awarded. He thought about the glass on his desk. He thought about a 9-year-old girl standing behind a curtain in the hallway of his house, watching. He drove home from the courthouse and sat in the woodworking shop for 2 hours, sanding the edge of a walnut panel he was slowly turning into a bookcase, and felt the strange, quiet weight of the fact that he was there to do it. The trust had been Marjolaine's idea, though she would later deny it. "You're going to want to do something," she'd said, 3 weeks after the party, in the same brisk way she'd managed his calendar for 16 years. You're going to feel the need to make a gesture. I'm telling you now so you don't do something impulsive that you can't take back or that makes the family uncomfortable. What would you suggest? Something that's useful when it's useful, not now when she needs it. Garrison had thought about that. He established the trust 6 weeks later. It was modest by the standards of what he could have done, but specific. A fund structured to pay for educational expenses, college tuition included, with a secondary provision for vocational training, if that was the path she chose. He had his attorney draw up the documents, reviewed them himself, old habits, and then called Audra. Audra had been very quiet on the phone. Then she'd said, "Garrison, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "That's not why I'm doing it." Another quiet. Then, "She's going to ask why. Tell her the truth, that she did something brave, and that it mattered, and that I want her to have options when she's old enough to need them. She'll say she didn't do it for a reward." "I know," Garrison said. "Tell her it's not a reward, it's an acknowledgement. There's a difference." Audra had needed a moment after that. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted in a way that she probably didn't know he could hear. "Thank," she said, "for listening to her." She made it easy, he said. She was very clear. Brinley came to see the lake house the following summer. Audra brought her down on a Saturday in July, and Garrison showed them around the property, the dock, the small rowboat he'd finally gotten around to painting, the woodworking shop where the bookcase was now finished and standing against the wall with 3 shelves of books on it. Brinley walked around the shop slowly, studying the tools, asking questions that were more specific than he expected. "How do you know where to cut?" she asked, looking at a half-finished panel clamped to the workbench. "You measure, and then you measure again, and then you go slowly." She picked up a small piece of scrap walnut from the pile on the side table and turned it over in her hands, feeling the grain. "It's smooth on this side," she said. "That's the face grain. Run your hand across it the other way and it'll feel different." She did. Her expression changed. "Oh, yep," he said. They stayed for lunch and most of the afternoon. When they left, Brinley shook his hand at the door, a formal, deliberate handshake, the way she'd clearly been taught, and said, "Thank you for the day, Mr. Ashworth." "Thank you for the warning, Brinley." She looked at him steadily. "Did you think I was lying when I first said it?" "No," he said. "I didn't, but you could have." "I could have," he agreed. "Some people would have." She seemed to be deciding how to say something then. "I knew you'd put the glass down, even before you did, because you turned toward me when I spoke. A lot of grown-ups don't do that." Garrison thought about that for a long time after the car pulled out of the driveway. He stood on the porch in the July afternoon and looked at the lake and thought about all the moments in a life when someone speaks clearly into a room full of noise, and whether you happen to be turned in the right direction to hear them. He thought about all the times he had not been. And then he went back into the shop because the second bookcase wasn't going to build itself, and because the afternoon light through the side window was exactly right, and because he was alive to use it.